I'm Emma Patterson, 28, and for my entire life, my parents treated me like their personal servant while idolizing my brother. Last night, they invited the CEO of my father's company for dinner to impress him, unaware that 6 months ago, I had quietly become that CEO's boss. The look on their faces when he stood up, bowed slightly, and said, "Thank you for dinner, but I should really be honoring Emma here is something I'll never forget." Before I dive into this wild story about family betrayal and sweet karma, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments and hit that subscribe button if you enjoy family revenge drama. Trust me, you'll want to stick around to see how I went from being treated like the family maid to watching my parents' world crumble right before my eyes. This journey has some twists you won't believe. Growing up in the Patterson household in suburban Chicago meant understanding your place in the family hierarchy. For my brother Michael, that meant being the golden child, celebrated, cherished, and groomed for success. For me, it meant being the family workhorse, the invisible backbone who kept everything running while receiving none of the credit. From my earliest memories, I can recall the stark difference in how my parents, Eleanor and Richard Patterson, treated us. Michael's achievements, no matter how small, were cause for celebration. My straight A's were met with, "That's nice, Emma. Now, did you finish the laundry?" When Michael joined the debate team in high school, my parents attended every competition. When I made it to the state finals in mathematics, they claimed they were too busy with Michael's college applications to attend. Our home was a 3-story colonial with perfectly manicured lawns in one of Chicago's most prestigious neighborhoods. My father was a senior vice president at Apex Innovations, a technology company that had been growing steadily over the past decade. My mother didn't work, though she served on several charity boards and spent most of her time maintaining the family's social calendar. From the outside, we were the picture-perfect American family. From the inside, we were a case study in favoritism and emotional neglect. By the time I turned 16, I had accepted my role. While Michael went out with friends, I stayed home to cook dinner. While my parents took Michael on college tours across the country, I was left behind to watch the house. I became so efficient at maintaining our home that my mother once joked to her friends that she didn't need a housekeeper as long as she had Emma. Everyone laughed. I smiled politely, but inside, something hardened. The summer before my senior year of high school, I overheard a conversation between my parents that would change everything. I was delivering fresh towels to their bathroom when I heard my father say, "We need to be realistic about college funds. Michael has a shot at Harvard Business School eventually, that's our priority. Emma can go to community college. She'll probably just get married anyway." My mother agreed without hesitation. Besides, she's so good at keeping house. Those skills will serve her better than some fancy degree. That night, I made a promise to myself, I would build a life so successful that they would be forced to recognize my worth. Not because I needed their approval anymore, but because I wanted them to realize what they had dismissed. I applied to colleges in secret, working 2 part-time jobs to pay for application fees. When the acceptance letters came in, including one from Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, I kept them hidden. I told my parents I'd be attending the local community college, just as they'd planned. They barely acknowledged the news, too busy celebrating Michael's acceptance to Princeton. What they didn't know was that I had secured enough scholarship money, financial aid, and part-time work to attend Northwestern. I majored in business with a minor in computer science, areas I knew would challenge me and potentially lead to financial independence. During those 4 years, I maintained the charade, coming home on weekends to clean and cook, listening to my parents brag about Michael's Ivy League adventures. The double life was exhausting but necessary. I couldn't risk them trying to sabotage my plans or, worse, trying to redirect my college funds to Michael if they knew I was attending a prestigious university. It was during this time that I developed the ability to smile pleasantly while planning 10 steps ahead, a skill that would serve me well in the corporate world later. In my junior year, I landed an internship at Meridian Technologies, a rising competitor to my father's company. The irony wasn't lost on me, but Meridian was known for its innovative approach and meritocratic culture. I excelled during that internship, impressing my supervisors with both my technical knowledge and business acumen. They offered me a full-time position upon graduation. When I finally graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern, I told my parents I had finished my associate's degree at community college. They barely looked up from planning Michael's graduation party from Princeton. My graduation ceremony was attended by friends and professors who had become mentors, but not by any family members. That day, as I accepted my diploma, I felt both profound sadness and liberating freedom. The path forward was entirely mine to shape. I started at Meridian Technologies the following month, living in a small apartment with 2 roommates to save money. I worked longer hours than anyone else, volunteered for the projects no one wanted, and studied industry trends in my spare time. Within 2 years, I had been promoted twice. By 26, I was leading my own team, developing strategies that were helping Meridian steadily gain market share. Some of it directly from Apex, my father's company. All this time, my parents remained oblivious to my actual career. When family gatherings occurred, I answered questions about my office job vaguely, redirecting conversations to Michael's accomplishments at my father's company, where he had been hired right out of college. I watched as my parents beamed with pride over his minor achievements, never suspecting that their daughter was quickly becoming a respected name in the industry. The most painful part wasn't their dismissal of me. I had grown accustomed to that. It was watching them pour resources, connections, and opportunities into Michael, who, despite his prestigious education, was mediocre at his job. He relied on charm and family connections rather than skill or work ethic. In the real world, outside the protective bubble my parents had created, Michael would have struggled to maintain his position. But at Apex, he was Richard Patterson's son, and that was enough. The turning point came on a cold January morning during a routine executive meeting at Meridian Technologies. Our CEO, Harrison Wells, announced his plans to acquire a struggling company, Apex Innovations. My father's company. The room buzzed with excitement, but I sat frozen, my mind racing through the implications. "Emma, you've been instrumental in our growth strategy," Harrison said, turning to me. "I'd like you to lead the acquisition team. Your knowledge of the industry is exactly what we need for this transition." In that moment, I should have disclosed my connection to Apex. Ethically, it was the right thing to do. But something stopped me, perhaps the memory of my father's dismissive words about my future, or maybe the realization that this was my chance to finally prove my worth on the grandest scale possible. "I'd be honored," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. That evening, I sat in my apartment, staring at the city lights through my window, contemplating the moral crossroads before me. Leading the acquisition meant I would have access to Apex's financials, their strengths, their weaknesses, and potentially, the power to determine the fate of my father's career. It also meant maintaining my secret a little longer. I called my best friend, Sophia, who had been my roommate in college and knew my whole story. "This is your chance, Em," she said after I explained the situation. "Not for revenge, but for closure. You've earned this position through hard work, not nepotism. You're the most qualified person for the job." "But they're my family," I whispered, surprising myself with the surge of protective instinct I still felt despite everything. "Family doesn't treat someone the way they've treated you," Sophia replied gently. "Besides, this is business. If someone else led the acquisition, the outcome for Apex might be worse." She was right. I could ensure the transition was fair, that good employees weren't needlessly laid off. I could shape the acquisition to be a merge of strengths rather than a corporate gutting. It would be a chance to demonstrate the business acumen and humanity my parents never believed I possessed. The next day, I assembled my team and began the process. For 3 months, I lived and breathed the acquisition. I learned everything about Apex, including discovering that the company's struggles were largely due to poor leadership decisions and an unwillingness to innovate. My father, I realized, had been part of the problem, clinging to outdated business models while competitors evolved. Most shocking was discovering that Michael, despite his title as Director of Business Development, had contributed to several failed initiatives that had cost the company millions. His proposals, shallow and poorly researched, had been implemented solely because of his father's influence. In board meetings, my father had defended these failures, blaming market conditions rather than Michael's incompetence. As the acquisition progressed, I maintained my distance from family gatherings, claiming work commitments. My parents barely noticed my absence, though my mother occasionally called to remind me about upcoming family events or to ask if I could help prepare for one of her dinner parties. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They still saw me as the family maid while I was engineering a corporate takeover that would reshape their lives. The acquisition was finalized more quickly than expected. Meridian Technologies would absorb Apex Innovations, retaining some employees while restructuring departments and leadership. As the architect of the deal, I made sure it was fair but firm. Employees with strong performance records would be offered positions at Meridian, regardless of their connections. Those who had been protected by nepotism would be evaluated on merit alone. Harrison Wells was impressed with my handling of the acquisition and called me into his office one afternoon in late April. "Emma, your work on this has been nothing short of extraordinary," he said, leaning back in his chair. "The board has taken notice. We've been discussing the future leadership of Meridian, especially as we integrate Apex and expand into new markets." I thanked him, expecting a promotion to perhaps senior vice president or a similar role. "I'm retiring at the end of the quarter," he continued, surprising me. "And the board unanimously agrees that you should be my successor." My breath caught. "You're offering me the CEO position?" He nodded, smiling broadly. "You've demonstrated every quality we need in a leader. Your strategic vision, your attention to detail, your ability to make tough decisions while still considering the human element. You're ready for this." I left his office in a daze, equal parts elated and terrified. I would be one of the youngest CEOs in the industry, and certainly one of the few women. The role would come with immense responsibility and scrutiny. But it also meant that I would be, effectively, my father's boss. And Michael's boss. And they didn't even know I worked at Meridian, let alone that I was about to become its chief executive. That evening, I received a rare call from my father. His voice was tight with forced cheerfulness. "Emma, we're hosting a very important dinner next Saturday. The CEO of the company that's acquiring Apex will be attending. Your mother and I would appreciate if you could help prepare and serve the meal. We want to make a good impression." The irony was almost too perfect. They were planning to impress the CEO of Meridian, not knowing that in 2 months, that would be me. They still saw me as the help, useful only for making their social engagements run smoothly. "I'll be there," I said, making a split-second decision. "But Dad, I won't be cooking or serving. I'd like to attend as a guest." There was a pause, then a condescending chuckle. "Emma, this is a business dinner. Michael will be there because he works at Apex. This is about making connections for the future." "I understand," I replied calmly. "But I'd still like to attend as a guest. I promise I won't get in the way." After some grumbling, he agreed, likely assuming he could put me to work once I arrived. Little did he know that this dinner would change everything, not just for me, but for our entire family dynamic. The week leading up to the dinner was a blur of preparations, both professional and personal. At Meridian, I was already transitioning into my new role, sitting in on board meetings and working closely with Harrison to ensure a smooth handover. Privately, I was preparing for what would undoubtedly be one of the most dramatic family confrontations of my life. Harrison had agreed to play along with my plan. He would attend the dinner as the current CEO of Meridian, allowing my parents to fawn over him. Only at the right moment would the truth be revealed. "Are you sure about this?" Harrison asked during our final planning meeting before the dinner. "It's going to be quite a shock for them. They've had 28 years to see me as more than their housekeeper," I replied. Sometimes shock is the only way to break through deeply entrenched perceptions. Saturday evening arrived, and I drove to my parents' house with a mix of anxiety and determination. I had chosen my outfit carefully, a tailored navy suit that projected authority without being ostentatious. My mother opened the door, immediately frowning at my appearance. "Emma, why aren't you dressed to help in the kitchen? The caterers need direction, and I haven't had time to arrange the flowers properly." "Hello to you too, Mom," I said, stepping inside. "I told Dad I'd be attending as a guest. I'm sure the professional caterers you hired can manage without me." She looked as if she wanted to argue but was distracted by the sound of another car pulling into the driveway. "That must be Mr. Wells." "Richard. He's here." She hurried off, leaving me standing in the foyer. I took a deep breath and moved to the living room, where Michael was lounging with a drink, looking nervous. He had good reason to be. His department's performance had been particularly poor, and he likely feared for his position in the restructured company. "Hey, big brother," I said, pouring myself a sparkling water. "Emma? What are you doing here? And why are you dressed like that?" He looked me up and down, confused by my professional attire. "Dad invited me." "To serve drinks, maybe," he scoffed. "This dinner is important. The new management will be making decisions about who stays and who goes. I need to make a good impression." I simply smiled. "I'm sure you'll do your best." The front door opened, and I heard my father's booming voice welcoming Harrison. I stayed in the living room, allowing the scene to unfold naturally. My father led Harrison in, introducing him to Michael with great fanfare. "And this is my son, Michael, our Director of Business Development at Apex. Harvard Business School graduate, top of his class." Harrison shook Michael's hand politely, though I knew he was well aware of Michael's actual performance record. Then his eyes met mine, and he smiled. "Emma. I didn't expect to see you here," he said warmly. My father looked between us, confusion evident on his face. "You know my daughter?" Harrison raised his eyebrows. "Know her? I've worked with her for years. One of the finest business minds I've ever encountered." The room fell silent. My mother, who had just entered with a tray of appetizers, nearly dropped it. Michael's mouth literally hung open. "There must be some mistake," my father said with a forced laugh. "Emma works some entry-level office job. She went to community college." Now it was Harrison's turn to look confused, though I knew it was an act. "Community college?" "Emma graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern. She's been at Meridian Technologies for 6 years, most recently as our Executive Vice President of Strategic Development. She led the entire Apex acquisition." My mother did drop the tray then, the delicate canapé scattering across the hardwood floor. "That's impossible," she whispered. I stepped forward, finally ready to claim my truth. "No, it's not impossible. It's what happens when you underestimate someone their entire life. I've worked at Meridian since graduation, from Northwestern, not community college. Every weekend I came home to help around the house, every family gathering I attended where you talked about Michael's accomplishments while ignoring me. I was building my career, step by step." "But, why didn't you tell us?" my father asked, his voice hollow. "Would you have believed me? Or supported me? You'd already decided my future when I was 17, community college and marriage, remember? I overheard you discussing it. You never once asked about my dreams or ambitions. It was always about Michael." Michael had sunk into a chair, his face pale. you led the acquisition? So you know everything? About my projects, my performance reviews? Everything, I confirmed. Every failed initiative, every inflated report. I've read it all. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is absurd. Harrison, regardless of whatever role Emma has played, I assume we'll be discussing the future of Apex's current leadership team. Michael and I have valuable institutional knowledge. Harrison looked at me, silently deferring to my authority. It was time for the final revelation. Actually, Dad, those decisions won't be up to Harrison. In 2 months, he's retiring. The board has unanimously selected his successor. I paused, letting the moment stretch. Me. I'll be the new CEO of Meridian Technologies, effective July 1st. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother sank into the nearest chair, her social facade crumbling. My father stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Michael looked like he might be sick. Harrison cleared his throat. It's true. Emma's leadership during the acquisition was the final confirmation the board needed. She's been on our succession shortlist for some time. My father tried to rally. Well, this is unexpected. But wonderful news, of course. Our daughter, a CEO. We always knew you had potential, Emma. No, you didn't, I said quietly. You never saw me at all. But that changes tonight. I'd like to pause here and say that if you've ever been underestimated by the people who should believe in you most, you're not alone. I see you, and I know how painful that journey can be. If you're finding this story resonating with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I share these deeply personal stories because I believe in the power of resilience and self-belief. Now, let's continue with what happened after my parents realized their family maid was about to become one of the most powerful executives in their industry. The dinner that followed my revelation was a masterclass in uncomfortable silence punctuated by desperate attempts at normal conversation. My mother, recovering from her initial shock, tried to salvage the evening by directing the caterers to serve the meal. My father oscillated between stunned disbelief and transparent attempts to rewrite history. You know, Emma always had a good head for numbers, he said to Harrison as we picked at our appetizers. I remember telling her she should consider business school. Harrison, to his credit, didn't contradict my father's blatant lie but gave me a knowing look across the table. I allowed these revisionist comments to slide, observing the rapidly shifting family dynamic with clinical detachment. The truth had been revealed, now I wanted to see how they would adapt to it. Michael was the most fascinating to watch. My brother, who had coasted through life on our parents' favoritism and connections, seemed to be experiencing an existential crisis in real time. He barely touched his food, his eyes darting between me, Harrison, and our father. I could almost see the calculations happening behind his eyes, assessing his chances of survival in the new corporate landscape where his sister held ultimate power. During the main course, he finally spoke directly to me, his voice low so our parents couldn't hear from the other end of the table. Were you planning this all along? Some kind of revenge? I considered the question carefully. No, Michael. I was planning a career. The fact that it intersected with Dad's company was coincidence, though I won't deny a certain poetic justice to the situation. So what happens now? He asked, vulnerability creeping into his voice for perhaps the first time in our adult relationship. Are you going to fire me? That depends, I replied honestly. Can you earn your position based on merit, not nepotism? I'm restructuring the company based on performance and potential, not family connections. He swallowed hard. I don't know if I can. Everything's always been arranged for me. For a moment, I saw my brother clearly. Not as the golden child who had tormented my childhood with his privilege, but as a man who had never been allowed to develop true confidence in his abilities. Our parents' favoritism had crippled him in ways I hadn't considered. Then this is your opportunity to find out what you're actually capable of, I told him. I'll give you a fair chance, which is more than I ever got. As dessert was being served, my mother, who had been unnaturally quiet, suddenly burst into tears. Conversations halted as all eyes turned to her. I don't understand, she sobbed. How could you keep this from us, Emma? We're your family. The audacity of her question ignited something in me. Family? Was I family when you joked to your friends about not needing a housekeeper because you had me? Was I family when you and Dad decided I wasn't worth college tuition because I would just get married anyway? Was I family during any of the hundreds of times you celebrated Michael's mediocrity while ignoring my achievements? Harrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly feeling like an intruder in our family drama. But I couldn't stop the words now that they had started flowing. I kept it from you because you gave me no choice. You created a narrative about who I was and what I was capable of, and you never bothered to question it. Even tonight, you invited me here to serve food, Mom. To impress the CEO who's actually about to become my employee. My father, attempting to regain control of the situation, cleared his throat. Emma, that's enough. You've made your point. We may have underestimated you, and for that, we apologize. But this hostile attitude isn't necessary. We're still your parents. Yes, you are, I agreed, my voice softening slightly. And despite everything, I do love you both. But our relationship needs to change fundamentally. I won't be your housekeeper anymore. I won't smile and nod while you dismiss my life. Either we build something new based on mutual respect, or we don't have a relationship at all. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy with decades of unspoken resentment and hurt. My mother's tears flowed freely now, and even my father looked shaken. Michael stared at his plate, perhaps recognizing himself in my accusations of favoritism. Harrison, displaying the interpersonal intelligence that had made him a successful CEO, gently suggested it might be time for him to leave. This is clearly a family matter that needs resolution, he said, standing. Emma, I'll see you at the office on Monday. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, thank you for dinner, but I should really be honoring Emma here. She's the architect of Meridian's recent success, and soon she'll be my boss. The formality of his statement, and the respect with which he addressed me, seemed to finally penetrate my parents' perception. This wasn't some elaborate joke or misunderstanding. Their daughter, whom they had relegated to household chores and dismissed as academically unworthy, was about to become the CEO of a major corporation. After Harrison left, an uneasy silence fell over the dining room. The caterers had retreated to the kitchen, leaving us alone with the aftermath of my revelation. I waited, curious to see who would speak first and what approach they would take. Would there be denial? Anger? An attempt to claim credit for my success? To my surprise, it was Michael who broke the silence. She's right, he said quietly, looking at our parents. You always favored me. You gave me everything and expected nothing. You gave her nothing and expected everything. He turned to me. And I let it happen because it was easier that way. I'm sorry, Emma. His unexpected apology caught me off guard. It was the first crack in the family facade, a small but significant acknowledgement of the truth I had lived with for years. My father's response was more predictable. This is ridiculous. We gave you both opportunities. Different opportunities, I interrupted. Very different. We did what we thought was best, my mother insisted, wiping her tears. We never meant to hurt you. Intent doesn't erase impact, I replied. You may not have meant to hurt me, but you did. Repeatedly and systematically. And now we're at a crossroads. I stood up, smoothing my suit jacket. I need some air. I'm going for a walk. When I come back, we can decide if we're going to have an honest conversation about moving forward, or if this is where our family story ends. As I stepped onto the front porch of my childhood home, the cool evening air washed over me. 6 years of maintaining my secret, of building my career in silence while playing the role my parents had assigned me, it was finally over. The truth was out, messy and painful but ultimately liberating. I walked slowly around the neighborhood, past houses where I had babysat to earn money for college applications, past the park where I had studied late into the evening because my home was too filled with praise for Michael to allow me to concentrate. This community had been the backdrop for my childhood, but I had outgrown it in ways my parents couldn't begin to comprehend. After about 30 minutes, I returned to the house, unsure what awaited me. Would my parents have rallied, presenting a united front of denial and minimization? Would they have left, unable to face the new reality? Or would there be the beginning of understanding, however small? What I found was my mother alone in the living room, looking smaller and older than I remembered. She patted the sofa beside her, inviting me to sit. "Your father went to his study," she explained. "He needs time to process." Michael left, said he had some thinking to do. She hesitated, then continued. "I've been sitting here trying to remember the last time I asked you about your dreams, your goals. I couldn't think of a single instance. What kind of mother doesn't know her daughter's dreams?" It was a start, a small acknowledgement of the fundamental failure in our relationship. Not enough, but a beginning. I know many of you watching have experienced family dynamics that left you feeling unseen or undervalued. This moment, sitting with my mother as she began to recognize the damage done, was both painful and healing. If you're connecting with this story, take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. In the next part, I'll share how this confrontation changed our family forever, and the unexpected challenges that came with finally being seen. Stay with me, the most surprising parts are still to come. The days following the dinner were a strange limbo of tense phone calls and awkward attempts at reconciliation. My father, predictably, retreated into work, though his position at Apex was now precarious at best. My mother vacillated between defensive justification of their parenting and tearful apologies that felt more about alleviating her guilt than addressing my pain. Michael, surprisingly, was the first to make a genuine effort to connect. He asked to meet for coffee at a neutral location, not our parents' house, not my apartment, but a small cafe halfway between. When I arrived, he was already there, looking uncharacteristically disheveled in jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he said after we'd settled with our drinks. "About how much was handed to me and how much was taken from you." I sipped my latte, allowing him space to continue. "I knew they favored me," he admitted. "I always knew. But it was easier to accept the privileges than to question them. And somewhere along the line, I started believing I deserved it all, the attention, the opportunities, the praise." He ran a hand through his hair. "Finding out about your actual career was like, I don't know, waking up from a dream. A dream where I was special and deserving, only to find out I was just lucky." "It wasn't your fault," I said, surprising myself with the realization that I meant it. "You were a child too. We were both shaped by their expectations." "Maybe, but I'm an adult now. I've had years to see the imbalance and say something." I didn't. He looked at me directly. "I've spent the last few days reviewing my work performance, honestly reviewing it. It's not good, Emma. I've been coasting on Dad's reputation." His honesty was refreshing. "Yes, you have. So what happens now? With Apex, with my job?" I had been considering this question since the acquisition began. "That depends on you. I'm implementing a 3-month probationary period for all executives from Apex. You'll be evaluated on your actual performance, just like everyone else. If you can prove your value, you'll keep a position, though perhaps not the one you currently hold. And if I can't? Then you'll be let go, with a fair severance package. Family connections won't save you anymore, Michael. But they won't count against you either. This is your chance to discover what you're actually capable of without Dad's protection or my resentment influencing the outcome. He nodded slowly. That's fair. More than fair, actually. He hesitated, then asked, and what about Mom and Dad? Have you talked to them since? Since I dropped the bombshell? Yes, briefly. Mom's calling daily, oscillating between guilt and defensiveness. Dad sent an email, saying he's processing the new information and will circle back when he's analyzed the situation. Like this is a business problem to solve rather than a family crisis. Michael winced. That sounds like Dad. It does, I agreed. But it's not good enough anymore. I've spent my entire life accommodating their expectations and limitations. I won't do it anymore. If they want a relationship with me, they need to see me, really see me, and take responsibility for the harm they've caused. And if they can't? I took a deep breath, acknowledging the possibility that had been haunting me. Then I'll accept that loss and move forward without them. I built a life they know nothing about. I can continue building it without their approval. We parted with an awkward hug, the first genuine physical affection between us in years. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was a step towards something new, something potentially healthier than what had come before. The following week, I formally accepted the CEO position at Meridian Technologies. The announcement made headlines in business publications, with several noting my relative youth and rapid ascent through the corporate ranks. One particular profile in Business Insider mentioned my mysterious background and sudden emergence as a power player in the tech industry. The morning it was published, my father called. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Not over the phone. In person. We arranged to meet at my office, my territory, not his. When he arrived, I watched through the glass walls of my corner office as my assistant led him through the open floor plan. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the father who had loomed large in my childhood. His eyes darted around, taking in the modern space, the employees nodding respectfully as I passed, the nameplate on my door, Emma Patterson, Chief Executive Officer. Impressive, he said as he entered, trying for casual but missing by a mile. Thank you, I replied, gesturing for him to sit. What did you want to discuss? He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with my directness. Richard Patterson was accustomed to controlling conversations, to people deferring to his authority. That dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I've been thinking about what you said at dinner. About how your mother and I treated you compared to Michael. He adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture I'd rarely seen from him. We may have had blind spots as parents. Blind spots, I repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling it? Emma, try to understand. We thought we were doing what was best for both of you. Michael seemed destined for business, he had the personality, the charm. You were always more practical. Dependable. Dependable, I echoed. Like a good appliance. He flinched. That's not fair. No, I agreed. None of it was fair. That's precisely the point. A tense silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed deeply. I don't know how to fix this, Emma. I'm trying to understand how we got here, how you became. He gestured around the office, this person we didn't know existed. How you kept this secret for so long. I kept it because you and Mom created an environment where I couldn't be honest about my ambitions. Every time I achieved something, it was dismissed or ignored. So I stopped sharing. I built this life parallel to the one you thought I had. And now, he asked. Now that we know, what do you want from us? It was the first genuinely honest question he'd asked, perhaps ever. What did I want from the parents who had undervalued me for decades? I want acknowledgement, I said after a moment's reflection. Not just of my career success, but of the pattern of favoritism that shaped our family. I want you and Mom to truly see how your actions affected me. And I want a relationship based on who I actually am, not who you assumed I would be. And Apex? My position? Michael's? The businessman in him couldn't help but ask. Those will be determined by merit, not family connection, I replied firmly. I won't punish good employees because they work for my father's company, but I won't protect poor performers because they're family. That includes you and Michael. He nodded slowly, processing the finality in my tone. There would be no special treatment, no exceptions. For perhaps the first time, Richard Patterson was confronting a situation he couldn't control through authority or manipulation. Your mother misses you, he said quietly as he prepared to leave. Whatever you think of me, consider talking to her. She's struggling with all of this. I promised to call her, though I made no commitments beyond that. As I watched my father walk through the office, shoulders slightly slumped, nodding awkwardly to employees who had no idea of our connection, I felt a complex mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and relief. The confrontation I had avoided for years had finally happened, and I had emerged with my truth intact. True to my word, I called my mother that evening. Our conversation was difficult, punctuated by her tears and my carefully maintained emotional boundaries. Unlike my father, she didn't attempt to justify their behavior but simply asked, repeatedly, why I hadn't told them about my education and career. Would you have believed me? I asked her. Or would you have found a way to minimize it, to redirect attention back to Michael? Her silence was answer enough. I need to know something, I said after a pause. If you could go back, knowing what you know now about who I am and what I'm capable of, would you have treated me differently? Would you have seen me? Oh, Emma, she whispered. I'd like to think so. But honestly? I don't know. We were so convinced we were doing the right thing, steering you both toward the futures we thought you were suited for. She paused. That's not a very satisfying answer, is it? No, I admitted. But it's probably the most honest one you've ever given me. The 3 months following my revelation were transformative for both Meridian Technologies and my family. At work, I led the integration of Apex with confidence and clarity, making decisions based on data and performance metrics rather than politics or personal connections. Some executives from my father's company thrived under the new leadership, others, accustomed to coasting on relationships rather than results, struggled. Michael surprised everyone, perhaps himself most of all. Stripped of the protective bubble our parents had created, faced with real accountability for perhaps the first time in his life, he rose to the challenge. He requested a demotion to a project management role where he could learn the business from the ground up, and he worked longer hours than anyone else on his team. I need to figure out who I am without Dad's influence, he explained when I asked about his decision. I've never earned anything on my own merit. It's time I started. My father's position was more complicated. His leadership style was fundamentally incompatible with Meridian's culture, and his resistance to innovation had been a primary factor in Apex's decline. After several tense performance reviews and frank conversations about expectations, he opted for early retirement. I'm not sure I can adapt to the new paradigm, he admitted during our final meeting. The industry has changed, and perhaps I haven't changed with it. It was the closest thing to humility I'd ever heard from him, and I respected the self-awareness it represented. We arranged a generous retirement package, not because he was my father, but because his institutional knowledge had value during the transition, and he had cooperated with the process despite his personal discomfort. Outside of work, rebuilding my relationship with my parents was a slow, often painful process. We began with weekly dinners, always at restaurants, neutral territory where I wouldn't automatically fall into the role of helper or server. Sometimes Michael joined us, sometimes not. We established new boundaries and expectations, explicitly stating what had previously gone unspoken. "I'm not available to help with housework when I visit," I told my mother firmly after she had attempted to hand me a laundry basket during a Sunday visit. "I'm here as your daughter, not your housekeeper." She had flushed with embarrassment but nodded. "Old habits," she murmured. "I'm trying, Emma." And she was, in her way. Both my parents were. They asked questions about my work, my friends, my life outside the family, questions they had never bothered to ask before. They learned, gradually and imperfectly, to see me as an autonomous adult with accomplishments and challenges entirely separate from my role in their household. I, in turn, worked to process my lingering resentment with the help of a therapist. The years of dismissal and emotional neglect had left deep wounds that wouldn't heal simply because my parents were now behaving differently. There were days when anger would surge unexpectedly, triggered by an offhand comment or a thoughtless comparison between Michael and me. I learned to name these feelings, to express them directly rather than burying them beneath politeness and accommodation. "When you said that, it reminded me of how you used to compare us," I would say. "It hurt then, and it hurts now." Sometimes these confrontations led to defensiveness, sometimes to genuine apologies. The important thing was that we were finally having honest conversations instead of performing the roles we had been assigned. My relationship with Michael evolved most dramatically. With the burden of our parents' favoritism acknowledged and the professional hierarchy between us clearly defined, we found common ground we had never experienced as children. He sought my advice on business matters, I invited him to social events with my friends. We would never have the carefree sibling bond that might have developed under different circumstances, but we were building something new, a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition or resentment. 6 months after the fateful dinner, Meridian Technologies was thriving under my leadership. We had successfully integrated Apex's strongest divisions, divested the underperforming ones, and established a corporate culture that valued innovation and meritocracy over tradition and connections. Business publications that had initially questioned my appointment now praised my bold vision and transformative leadership style. I had proven myself, not just to my family, but to the industry and, most importantly, to myself. The little girl who had been told she wasn't worth college tuition was now leading a company valued at over $2 billion. The teenager who had cleaned her parents' house while her brother was celebrated had created a corporate environment where performance was what mattered, not pedigree or charm. One crisp autumn evening, I invited my parents to the office for the first time since my father's retirement. I gave them a tour of the renovated space, introducing them to key team members, showing them the innovations we were developing. My mother, who had never taken much interest in my father's business affairs, asked thoughtful questions about our products and strategy. As we stood in my office overlooking the city skyline, my father cleared his throat awkwardly. "I owe you an apology, Emma," he said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Not just for how we treated you growing up, but for underestimating you professionally. What you've built here, it's remarkable. More than I ever accomplished at Apex." Coming from Richard Patterson, this admission was nothing short of extraordinary. For a man who had defined himself by his business acumen and authority, acknowledging his daughter's superior achievement represented a fundamental shift in self-perception. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." "I just wish," my mother began, then hesitated. "What, Mom?" "I wish we hadn't wasted so much time. So many years when we could have been celebrating your talents instead of." She gestured vaguely, unable to fully articulate the magnitude of their mistake. "Instead of treating me like the help?" I finished for her. She winced but nodded. "Yes. Instead of that." "We can't change the past," I said after a moment. "But we're creating a different future. That counts for something." As they prepared to leave, my father paused at the door to my office, looking back at the space that so clearly represented my success and vision. "I'm proud of you, Emma," he said. "I know that might not mean much after everything, but I am." 6 years earlier, those words would have meant everything to me, validation from the father whose approval I had craved my entire childhood. Now, they were welcome but not necessary. I had built my confidence on foundations much stronger than parental approval. "Thank you, Dad," I replied. "I'm proud of me too, V." 1 year to the day after the dinner that changed everything, I stood at the podium in Meridian's main conference room, addressing our annual shareholders meeting. The company had exceeded all performance projections under my leadership, with stock prices reaching historic highs and innovative new products generating buzz throughout the industry. In the audience, I could see my parents sitting near the back, listening attentively as I outlined our vision for the coming year. They attended not as family obligated to show support, but as interested observers who had learned to respect my professional expertise. My father occasionally nodded at particularly astute points in my presentation, the gesture of a fellow business professional rather than a condescending parent. Michael was there too, but not in the audience. He stood to the side with other department heads, prepared to present his team's achievements later in the program. In the past year, he had earned a promotion based entirely on his own merit, a fact that had given him more genuine confidence than all our parents' hollow praise combined. As I concluded my remarks to enthusiastic applause, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The scared teenager who had hidden Northwestern acceptance letters, the young woman who had maintained a double life for years, the executive who had finally revealed her truth in a dramatic confrontation, all versions of me that had led to the confident CEO I now was. The path hadn't been easy. There had been painful conversations, therapy sessions where I had broken down in tears, family dinners that ended in tense silence. Rebuilding relationships on new foundations required dismantling the old ones first, and that demolition was often messy and painful. But the structures we were creating now were healthier, more authentic, and more equitable than what had come before. After the shareholders' meeting, my family gathered at my apartment for dinner, a new tradition we had established to replace the uncomfortable gatherings at my parents' house. My mother no longer expected me to cook or clean. Instead, we ordered takeout or my father grilled on the balcony while we all contributed equally to the meal. "To Emma," Michael said, raising his glass in a toast. "For showing us all what's possible when talent meets opportunity." My parents echoed the sentiment, their expressions genuine. The past year had humbled them in ways they never expected, forcing them to confront not just their mistreatment of me but the false assumptions that had informed their entire approach to parenting. They were different people now, more reflective, more careful with their words and actions. Later that evening, as we sat around the living room sharing stories and plans, my father asked an unexpected question. "Do you regret not telling us sooner? About Northwestern, about your career? Could we have fixed things earlier if we had known?" I considered the question carefully. "I don't think so," I finally replied. "You and Mom weren't ready to see me differently. You had your narrative about who Michael and I were, and it would have taken something as dramatic as what happened to break through that perception. But all those years of resentment," my mother began, "were painful," I acknowledged. "But they also made me who I am. The determination, the strategic thinking, the resilience, I developed those because I had to, because nothing was handed to me. I'm not grateful for the hurt, but I am grateful for the strength it created." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "I've actually been thinking about that a lot lately. How being the favorite actually handicapped me. I never had to develop the skills Emma did because I never faced the same obstacles." "That's very insightful," our father said, looking at Michael with new respect. "And a reminder that parents can harm their children with favoritism in both directions." The conversation drifted to other topics, work projects, future plans, a vacation we were considering taking together the following summer. It was ordinary family talk, the kind I had always envied in other families but never experienced in my own. Now, finally, we were building those normal bonds, creating memories that weren't tainted by favoritism or exploitation. As my parents prepared to leave, my mother hugged me tightly. "I'm so sorry it took us so long to see you," she whispered. "Thank you for giving us another chance." I hugged her back, feeling the genuine emotion in her embrace. "We're all learning," I told her. "That's what matters now." After they left, Michael lingered, helping me clear away the takeout containers despite my insistence that it wasn't necessary. "I've been thinking," he said as we finished. "About that dinner a year ago, when Harrison called you boss." "What about it?" "The look on Mom and Dad's faces." He chuckled. "It was like their entire worldview collapsed in that moment. But you know what's strange? I think it was the best thing that ever happened to our family." I leaned against the counter, considering his words. "How so?" "Before, we were living a lie, all of us. Mom and Dad thought they knew who we were, but they didn't. I thought I was succeeding on my own merits, but I wasn't. You were hiding your true self. None of us could really connect because we weren't being authentic." He shrugged. "Now, it's harder in some ways. There's conflict sometimes, hurt feelings. But it's real. We're seeing each other clearly for the first time." As he left with a quick hug, I realized he was right. The family hierarchy had been shattered beyond repair, but from its ruins, we were building something potentially stronger, a family based on truth rather than convenient fictions, on earned respect rather than arbitrary roles. My journey from family maid to CEO had been about more than professional success. It had been about claiming my worth, demanding recognition not just for what I could do for others but for who I was in my own right. The little girl who had quietly folded laundry while her brother was celebrated had become a woman who would no longer be invisible or taken for granted. And perhaps most surprisingly, the revelation that had initially seemed like the perfect revenge, watching my parents' faces as they realized their daughter was now their social superior, had ultimately led to something more valuable than retribution. It had led to reconciliation, to growth, to the possibility of genuine family bonds that had seemed impossible a year earlier. Karma had indeed come full circle, but not in the way I had imagined. The true justice wasn't in watching my parents squirm with embarrassment or regret, it was in finally being seen, truly seen, by the people who had looked past me for so long. And in the process, I had gained not just professional success but personal healing, not just respect but the possibility of love. As I stood on my balcony that night, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for decades. The little girl who had never been enough was now a woman who knew her own worth, not because of titles or achievements, but because she had claimed it for herself. And that was the sweetest victory of all. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, I want to sincerely thank you for listening. Family dynamics can leave deep scars, but they don't have to define your future. I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family karma or moments when you were finally recognized for your true worth. Please share in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their family struggles. I'll be sharing more life lessons from my journey in future videos. Thank you for being part of this community where we can heal together through our shared stories.